Hello, my friend. You are still awake. But that's all right. You're here now, and we've got something calm and quiet to help ease your mind. Tonight we're going back to ancient China, not for drama, not for dynasties, but the crazy facts, ones that get left out of textbooks. Like how some nobles were buried with hundreds of perfectly arranged servants alive, many of whom didn't volunteer. Before we drift off, please like and subscribe if you want more content like this. And leave a comment telling us what time it is and where you're from. We love seeing our night owls. All right, let's dim the lights, get cozy, slow everything down, and begin. Fact number 1. In ancient China, royal tombs were often sealed with rivers of liquid mercury, poured into underground chambers to simulate flowing water in the afterlife. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, reportedly had entire landscapes recreated beneath the earth, with mountains made of bronze, stars made of pearls, and streams of mercury flowing through man-made valleys. It was meant to preserve eternity. Instead, it made the tomb toxic. Modern archaeologists still haven't opened it, not out of reverence, but because the air inside might still be dangerous. 2. The earliest forms of tea in ancient China weren't meant for quiet sipping. They were boiled into thick, savoury soups, mixed with salt, orange peel, ginger, scallions and fermented milk. It wasn't about relaxation, it was medicine, and possibly punishment. 3. During the Han Dynasty, ice cream existed. Sort of wealthy families mixed buffalo milk, flour and camphor, then packed it in snow to chill. It was sweetened with honey or fruit, but mostly tasted like cold, scented dough. Luxury had texture. Flavor was optional. 4. Footbinding began in the 10th century and continued for 1,000 years. Girls as young as 5 had their feet broken and tightly wrapped to keep them small, creating the so-called lotus foot. It was considered beautiful, and it made walking a lifelong struggle. 5. Toothbrushes existed in ancient China by the Tang dynasty. They used animal bone handles and bristles made from pig hair. It worked well enough, but your breath probably still made a statement. 6. Chopsticks were originally cooking tools, not eating utensils. They were used for stirring, flipping and retrieving food from hot oil. Only later did they make their way to the table. It was convenience, then culture. 7. Soy sauce was first brewed over 2,500 years ago as a way to stretch salt. Fermented beans and grains created a dark, savoury liquid that lasted longer and cost less. It began as a practical solution. Now it's in refrigerators around the world, sometimes unopened. 8. Ancient Chinese toilets were simple pits, but wealthy homes had ceramic toilet seats and wooden footrests. Some even came with bamboo wiping sticks dipped in water or vinegar. It wasn't comfortable, but it was intentional. 9. Fireworks were invented by accident. Alchemists searching for immortality mixed saltpeter, sulfur and charcoal and ended up with explosions. It didn't grant eternal life, but it did light up birthdays. 10. The Chinese invented paper in the 2nd century BCE using mulberry bark, hemp and fishnets. Before that, writing was done on bamboo slats, silk or turtle shells. Paper made information portable and bureaucracy unstoppable. 11. In ancient Chinese banquets, shark fin soup was not only a delicacy but a display of wealth and status. The fins had little flavour, but their texture was prized. The process of harvesting them was brutal. The shark was often discarded alive after the fin was removed. The dish became more about power than taste. 12. One form of execution in imperial China was known as death by 1,000 cuts. It involved methodical slicing of the body over time, intended not just to kill, but to dishonor. It was used for crimes like treason or patricide. The punishment wasn't just physical, it erased the soul's path to peace. 13. Hot pot, now a popular comfort food, began as a simple copper pot filled with broth used by Mongol horsemen to cook meat quickly. Over time, it evolved into a communal meal where everyone cooked and dipped their own food. The original broth included things like bone marrow, intestines, and fermented tofu. Dinner was boiling and rarely subtle. 14. Ancient Chinese doctors believed disease was caused by imbalances in qi, the body's energy flow. Treatments included acupuncture, cupping, and herbal medicine. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it just left bruises. 15. Public shaming was a common punishment. Criminals were paraded through the streets wearing wooden collars called kangs, which could weigh up to 20 kilograms. They restricted movement, attracted flies, and made eating nearly impossible. Shame was slow and heavy. 16. Salt was so valuable in ancient China that it was regulated by the state. Entire economies were built around its trade. Salt taxes paid for armies. Salt smugglers were executed. Preservation came at a cost. 17. Silk was first produced in China over 5,000 years ago. Legend says it began when an empress accidentally dropped a cocoon into hot tea, unraveling the thread. Silkworms became a state secret. Revealing how silk was made was punishable by death. Fashion came with espionage. 18. The Chinese invented the first seismograph in 132 CE. It used a large bronze vessel with 8 dragon heads pointing in different directions. If an earthquake struck, a ball would drop from the mouth of the dragon in the direction the tremor came from. The instrument was elegant and eerily accurate. 19. Boiled rice wasn't always the norm. In some regions, rice was fermented into sour pastes or steamed in leaves for texture. Sticky rice was even used in mortar to build parts of the Great Wall. Some meals were eaten, others just held buildings together. 20. Branding was used as a form of punishment. Criminals could have characters burned into their skin, on the face, the hands, or the neck, marking them for life. It was efficient and impossible to hide. 21. During the Tang dynasty, it was fashionable for elite women to paint their faces with tiny decorative floral patterns. They used coloured powders and pressed gold leaf into their cheeks or foreheads. It wasn't subtle, but it told you who had time to not sweat. 22. Ancient Chinese punishment sometimes included castration, not just physical, but social. Eunuchs often served in imperial palaces and could gain enormous political influence. They had access to secrets and no heirs. The court trusted them, mostly. 23. Noodles have existed in China for over 4,000 years. The oldest bowl ever discovered was made of millet, not wheat, and was buried under 10 feet of earth. It wasn't spicy, and probably wasn't al dente, but it was the beginning of a very long dinner. 24. Tombs for high-ranking nobles were often stocked with pottery servants. Dozens, even hundreds of figurines stood frozen in postures of service, carrying trays, pouring wine, or bowing. Some were hollow, some weren't. All were expected to keep working forever. 25. The Chinese invented the compass in the 2nd century BCE using lodestone, a naturally magnetized rock, suspended on bronze plates. It pointed south, not north, but it still worked, eventually. 26. In traditional medicine, powdered rhinoceros horn was used to treat fever, headaches, and various invented conditions. It didn't actually help, but it was expensive, rare, and grounded into tea anyway. The placebo effect had prestige. 27. Some emperors were buried with miniature models of their kingdoms, complete with tiny rivers, bronze figurines, chariots, and household items. Everything they ruled scaled down, because power didn't stop at death, it just shrank. 28. The 4 beauties of ancient China were legendary women known for their looks and political consequences. At least one caused a kingdom to fall, another distracted a king into forgetting his empire. Beauty was seen as divine and inconvenient. 29. Chinese opera dates back over 1,000 years and originally blended poetry, acrobatics and masked performance. Early shows could last several hours or even days. The costumes were colourful. The makeup was symbolic. The audience sat through all of it. 30. During periods of famine, some villagers reportedly ground tree bark and clay into paste to make porridge. It didn't taste good. And it didn't help much, but it gave the illusion of food, and that was better than nothing. 31. The abacus was used in China for over 1,500 years and is still taught in some schools. With enough training, it's faster than a calculator for basic arithmetic. It makes no sound, leaves no record, and doesn't need batteries. 32. The imperial examination system, designed to find government officials based on merit, involved memorizing and writing essays on Confucian texts. It could take years of preparation, and passing meant a lifetime of bureaucracy. Success meant status. Failure meant try again. 33. Ancient Chinese banquets often served dishes like jellyfish salad, braised pig trotters, and goose intestines sautéed in wine. Texture mattered more than flavour. Chewing was a conversation topic, and some things were boiled longer than others deserved. 34. The moon calendar was central to life in ancient China. Festivals, farming, weddings and funerals were all planned by lunar phase. Some days were lucky, some were cursed. The stars did not explain themselves. 35. So, punishment for cheating on an imperial exam could include public whipping or exile. In rare cases, you were buried alive under the examination hall. Academic dishonesty had depth and a lot of dirt. 36. Bamboo slips were used for writing before paper existed. Each strip held a line of text and was tied together with cord. A single document could weigh as much as a person. Reading was quiet, but not light. 37. Taoist monks believed that certain alchemical elixirs could grant immortality. Many of them contained mercury or arsenic. Ironically, seeking eternal life often resulted in an early death, but they died trying repeatedly. 38. The earliest Chinese umbrellas were made from oiled paper stretched over bamboo ribs. They kept off rain and occasionally collapsed in wind. They weren't elegant, but they were practical and mostly dry. 39. It was once believed that thunder was the sound of angry spirits and lightning bolts were heavenly warnings. Some households banged pots during storms to scare them off. It didn't work, but it passed the time. 40. Some emperors had food tasters for every meal. Poisoning was a popular retirement plan in palace politics. A good taster rarely lasted long, but they ate well until they didn't. 41. In imperial China, titles were everything. An official's rank determined the color of their robe, the shape of their hat, and even how many steps they were allowed to take before bowing. A single misstep in etiquette could end a career. Promotions were slow, demotions could be fatal, and robes had opinions. 42. The character for trouble in Chinese is written by combining the symbols for woman and roof. Add a second woman under the same roof, and the meaning becomes quarrel. Linguistics, apparently, had feelings and no intention of hiding them. 43. The Great Wall of China wasn't one wall, it was many, built over centuries by different dynasties. Some were made of tamped earth, others used stone and bricks. Construction spanned deserts, mountains and grasslands. Tens of thousands of workers died building it. Many were buried inside the wall itself. Tourists rarely ask where. 44. To preserve food, ancient Chinese cooks developed methods like fermenting, salting and drying. Soybeans became soy paste, cabbage became pickled. Eggs were buried in clay ash and salt to create century eggs, black on the outside, grey-green on the inside, and smelling faintly of ammonia. They were considered a delicacy, and still are. Somehow. 45. The imperial kitchens were vast operations. Emperors ate from menus that rotated with the seasons and could include over 100 dishes per meal, but they never finished them. Each plate was sampled, then replaced. Servants tasted every bite first. Poison was always on the menu, even when it wasn't. 46. Ancient Chinese astronomers documented sunspots, eclipses and comets long before Western records. They charted the sky not only to understand it, but to interpret omens. A comet wasn't just a ball of ice, it was a warning. The heavens kept the calendar and occasionally threw shade. 47. The punishment known as lingering death could be carried out over 3 days, with the body kept alive for as long as possible. Executioners were trained to avoid major arteries. It was a spectacle and a message, one that was hard to misunderstand. 48. Imperial concubines lived within the palace walls, surrounded by servants, guards, and silence. They could not leave without permission. Many never saw the outside world again. The palace was beautiful and inescapable. 49. The earliest mechanical clocks were invented in China during the Tang dynasty. They used water wheels, gears, and wooden figures to mark time. Some even chimed on the hour. They weren't accurate by modern standards, but they were consistent, mostly. 50. Ancient Chinese burial suits for royalty were sometimes made entirely of jade. Each suit required thousands of individual tiles sewn together with silk or gold thread. It was believed jade could protect the body from decay. It didn't, but the stitching was exquisite. 51. In ancient medicine, dried tiger bone was believed to strengthen vitality. It was boiled into tonics or ground into powder. It did not work, but the belief lasted long enough to nearly wipe out the animal. Confidence can be dangerous, especially when consumed. 52. Students training for the imperial exams memorized thousands of characters and classical texts. Testing centers were cramped stone booths where examinees wrote for 3 days, eating, sleeping and thinking inside the same cubicle. Some collapsed from exhaustion, others cheated. All were judged. 53. The Chinese invented suspension bridges using woven bamboo long before the use of steel cables. These bridges swung, bounced, and creaked across mountain passes and rivers. Crossing them required balance and denial. 54. Funeral rituals were strictly defined by rank and class. Mourners wore hemp robes and cried loudly on command. The amount of wailing was often proportional to the size of the inheritance. Grief had guidelines and a schedule. 55. Writing in brush and ink was a daily discipline for scholars. They practiced calligraphy on reusable silk scrolls or water-absorbent sand trays. A single stroke could determine elegance or disgrace. The paper could be burned. The reputation couldn't. 56. Boiled frog was once prescribed for coughing fits. So was turtle shell, snake bile, and crushed cockroach. Herbal medicine often shared space with whatever else was available. Effectiveness was uncertain, but bravery was required. 57. To discourage rebellion, executed traitors sometimes had their entire family punished. Parents, siblings, children, even distant cousins. It was called execution of 9 relations. Guilt apparently ran in the blood. 58. The invention of movable type printing in China predates Gutenberg by centuries. Characters were carved into clay blocks, then arranged for each page. It was slower than handwriting at first, but it never got tired. 59. The emperor's dragon robe had exactly 12 symbols of cosmic authority, including mountains, stars, and fire. No one else could wear yellow silk or dragons with 5 claws. To do so was considered treason. Fashion had consequences. 60. Ancient Chinese tombs were sometimes filled with mercury, not just for preservation, but as a trap. Poisonous vapor would build up over centuries, waiting for grave robbers who couldn't hold their breath long enough. Some doors were sealed, others exhaled. 61. Chinese shadow puppetry began over 2,000 years ago using carved leather figures held behind lit silk screens. Stories were told using music, voice acting, and delicate hand movements. Entire battles, romances, and political dramas unfolded in flickering silhouettes. Audiences watched with quiet fascination because the puppets said more than they revealed. 62. Paper money was first issued in China during the Tang dynasty. Merchants once carried heavy strings of copper coins tied around their waist or neck. Paper notes backed by the state were easier to carry and harder to counterfeit. At least in theory, when inflation hit, it hit hard, and the notes became lighter than their value. 63. Imperial eunuchs often served as spies, tax collectors, and political advisors. They had access to the emperor, the treasury, and everyone's secrets. Some ruled entire departments, others ran entire dynasties from behind the curtain. They gave up everything, except ambitions. 64. In Taoist practice, some monks tried to subsist entirely on pine needles, minerals, and air. They believed it purified the body and prepared the soul for immortality. Most died of starvation, but they died in meditation, which was considered a success. 65. The standard punishment for forging official seals was death. Even possessing the wrong type of ink could lead to an investigation. Authority was measured in red stamps, and ink was power. 66. The Chinese calendar follows a 60-year cycle that combines 10 heavenly stems with 12 earthly branches. Each year has an associated animal, element, and personality. It's more complicated than it sounds, and somehow still more accurate than your horoscope. 67. Ancient Chinese umbrellas weren't just for rain. They were also used in religious ceremonies, weddings, and imperial processions. Carrying an umbrella over the emperor was a full-time job. The shade wasn't for comfort, it was symbolic. 68. Silkworms were so important to China's economy that their eggs were stored in guarded facilities. The penalty for smuggling them out of the country was death. Despite this, someone eventually did, and the Silk Road was never the same again. 69. Ancient Chinese stoves were fueled with twigs, pine needles, and dried animal dung. Meals took hours to prepare. The smoke filled rooms and coated everything in a fine grey film. Flavour took work. So did breathing. 70. Marriage contracts often included a detailed list of dowry items. Furniture, silks, livestock, cookware, and sometimes servants. If the marriage failed, dowries could be contested in court. Some trials lasted longer than the marriage itself. Love wasn't mentioned, but the chairs were itemized. 71. Early Chinese maps were hand-drawn on silk and bamboo. They included rivers, mountains, and mythical beasts, just in case. Some were wildly inaccurate, but beautifully so. 72. Taxes could be paid in rice, silk, grain, or labor. In rural villages, officials traveled door to door with scales, scrolls, and soldiers. Mistakes were common, appeals were discouraged, compliance was expected. 73. To create bronze bells for rituals, ancient craftsmen used clay molds and molten alloys. Each bell was tuned to a precise pitch. Entire sets could play music, but no two bells were shaped the same. Harmony came from imbalance. 74. To ward off evil, people hung peachwood charms above their doors. Peach trees were believed to repel ghosts and misfortune. The branches were carved into swords, talismans, and door guardians. It didn't always work, but it looked convincing. 75. Confucianism shaped nearly every part of Chinese government and education. It emphasized respect, hierarchy, self-control, and duty. For over 1,000 years, children were taught how to obey before they were ever taught how to read. 76. Prisoners were sometimes forced to wear iron collars that weighed up to 20 kilograms. They were kept on for days or weeks at a time. The pain wasn't just physical, it made sleeping, eating, and thinking nearly impossible. Punishment was quiet, but constant. 77. During the Qing dynasty, elite officials wore rank badges embroidered with specific birds or animals. A crane meant first rank, a lion meant military power, a mistake in stitching could cost someone their job or their head. 78. Ghost money, made of thin paper, was burned at funerals and ancestor festivals. It was believed to help loved ones afford things in the afterlife. Whole stacks were set on fire. Houses, horses, even paper iPhones. Inflation affects everyone, even the dead. 79. The Chinese wheelbarrow had a central wheel beneath the load, allowing a single person to transport up to 200 kilograms of goods. It wasn't elegant, but it made the road shorter and the work heavier. 80. The ancient game of Go or Wakey was played with black and white stones on a wooden grid. It's over 2,500 years old and still studied today. Games can last for hours with no clear winner until the very end. It's not about speed, it's about who makes the last quiet move. 81. Imperial palaces were designed with strict spatial rules. Rooms, courtyards and gardens were aligned along cardinal directions. Even the number of steps leading to a throne platform followed symbolic rules. You didn't just walk through a palace, you moved through layers of meaning. 82. Some tombs contained stone tablets with the deceased's biography etched in fine calligraphy. The writing detailed their virtues, titles, family and achievements. Failures were left out. Even in death, the edit button stayed on. 83. The Chinese invented the crossbow long before it appeared in Europe. Early designs used trigger mechanisms made of bronze and bolts that could punch through armor. It was quiet, deadly, and easy to learn. That's why generals liked it, and emperors feared it. 84. In some dynasties, the emperor's meals were delivered by dozens of tasters, guards, and servants, each responsible for one task, so that no single person could poison the food. Dinner arrived slowly, and no one knew what would be safe to eat until it was already gone. 85. The Imperial Library once held tens of thousands of scrolls. Many were handwritten copies of Confucian texts, legal codes, and histories. Others were banned works, locked away so no one could read them. Preservation and censorship shared a shelf. 86. Silk farming was so important that entire households worked around the worm's life cycle. Mulberry leaves were picked by hand. Larvae were fed several times a day, and when it was time, the cocoons were boiled to harvest the thread. It was quiet, repetitive, and slightly cruel, but the fabric was soft. 87. To repel insects, people burned herbs like mugwort, hung dried citrus peels in corners, or scattered vinegar across thresholds. It didn't always work, but it made the room smell like someone had tried. 88. Official records were kept on long scrolls and bamboo strips and stored in fireproof vaults beneath government offices. Floods, fires, and regime changes destroyed most of them, which is why so many records today begin with the phrase, according to legend. 89. Noble women were trained in music, calligraphy, embroidery, and restraint. Their posture was judged. Their voice was expected to remain low and composed. Their lives were orchestrated, like furniture, with titles. 90. The Chinese invented kites as early as 500 BCE. Some were used to signal troops, others were flown for fun, with whistles added to create ghostly sounds in the wind. A few were large enough to carry people. Briefly. 91. The emperor's name was considered sacred. People were forbidden from saying or writing it casually. Sometimes entire characters were changed in books and letters to avoid using his name by accident. Even paper showed respect. 92. In ancient villages, rooftops were sometimes covered in grass, not for decoration, but to feed goats kept on top of the house. Goats kept the roof trimmed and occasionally wandered off. 93. Taoist temples were often built deep in the mountains, surrounded by mist, waterfalls, and ancient trees. Priests believed that distance from society brought clarity. They weren't wrong, but no one was around to hear it. 94. Executioners were trained not only in blade work, but in etiquette. They bowed before and after their task. Some had reputations for mercy. Others were known to miss on purpose, depending on the bribe. 95. Imperial birth records were handwritten by palace scribes and sealed with vermilion ink. Some included the exact moment of birth, weather conditions, and omens spotted in the sky. Astrology was policy, and birth was political. 96. When new dynasties took power, old monuments were often destroyed or renamed. Stone carvings were chiseled away, scrolls were burned, and history was rewritten from the beginning. It happened so often that some emperors made a career out of erasing the previous one. 97. Chinese medicine once prescribed turtle shell, deer antler, dried lizards, and powdered pearls. They were crushed, brewed, boiled, or smoked. Side effects were not listed, but they were likely. 98. Famous poets were sometimes exiled for writing the wrong verse. One metaphor too sharp, one line too political, and they found themselves living beside a salt lake with nothing but ink. They still wrote, but no one read it. 99. Ancient bridges were built with carved stone railings, each block fitted without mortar. Some lasted centuries, others fell in a flood, but they all stood long enough to prove someone cared about how people crossed. 100. Ancient China was never just one thing. It was dynasties, deserts, poems, recipes, punishments, silence, and ritual. Most of what we know comes from what someone chose to write down. The rest drifted into the dark like smoke from a censored name. Still not asleep? That's all right, we've got more. No need to move, no need to rewind. Just stay right where you are. Let's keep going. A few more quiet facts about ancient things in no particular hurry. 101. During the Song dynasty, night soil, also known as human waste tea, was collected from city latrines and sold to farmers as fertilizer. It was gathered before sunrise by licensed collectors with carts and long-handled buckets. It didn't go to waste, but it didn't smell like progress either. 102. To train focus, some scholars practiced calligraphy using water on stone. The writing would disappear as it dried, leaving nothing behind but the memory of the stroke. It was meditation and futility at the same time. 103. In some periods, touching a member of the royal family without permission was punishable by death, even by accident. Servants carried messages without looking up and walked backwards to exit the room. Respect wasn't assumed. It was enforced. 104. The Ministry of Rites oversaw everything from sacrifices to seating charts. It determined when festivals were held, how rituals were performed, and who got to sit where during dinner, spiritual and administrative, like most good bureaucracies. 105. Peking duck dates back to at least the Yuan dynasty. The bird was seasoned, air-dried, glazed, and roasted in an open oven. It was sliced thin and served with paper-thin pancakes. The skin was the prize. The meat was an afterthought. 106. During wartime, messengers sometimes carried documents in hollowed-out coins. A wax seal hid the note inside, small enough to pass unseen and worthless enough to ignore, unless someone was looking closely. 107. Some temples used turtle shells for divination. They were heated until they cracked, and priests read the fractures to answer questions. The answers were vague, but the process was very clear. 108. A scholar's desk was considered sacred. Brushes were placed in a specific order. Inkstones were never touched with dirty hands. Dusting was done gently. Chaos was for other rooms. 109. Ancient Chinese locks used sliding pin mechanisms that could only be opened with a shaped key. The design was so effective it changed very little for over 1,000 years. Quiet, simple, mechanical, like most well-kept secrets. 110. Some emperors built echo walls, circular courtyards where sound travelled across curved stone perfectly. You could whisper on one side and be heard on the other. They were used for music, ceremonies, and occasionally eavesdropping. 111. The imperial court had a position called Keeper of the Royal Chop. It was this person's job to safeguard the emperor's seal. A carved block used to authorize every official document. If someone else had it, they could issue orders in his name. 112. In famine years, some regions served bark porridge, made from scraped tree bark, boiled in water with roots and weeds. It filled the stomach but offered little else. Hunger doesn't wait for flavor. 113. To honor ancestors, families burned incense, set out food offerings, and bowed 3 times before stone tablets with their names. The dead were expected to watch over the living, but only if properly fed. 114. Some emperors held court only once a month, others held it daily, beginning before dawn and lasting until noon. Petitions were read aloud, officials debated policy, tea was served, and nothing changed. 115. The Chinese character for home includes a roof over the symbol for pig, because early homes kept pigs inside for warmth, waste, and dinner. Shelter had layers, some of them noisy. 116. Certain medicines were shaped like coins, stamped with characters and stored in silk pouches. They were swallowed whole, because crushing them would spoil the symbolism. And the point. 117. The Jade Emperor, ruler of heaven in Taoist belief, was said to oversee a celestial bureaucracy filled with gods, scribes, and heavenly court officials. It was orderly, and just as slow as the earthly version. 118. Some judges issued rulings in verse. The rhyme made them memorable, the punishment made them effective. Poetry had teeth and consequences. 119. During large state funerals, streets were cleared, windows closed, and drums beat steadily through the capital. Mourners wore white, spectators remained silent. Even grief had choreography. 120. Ancient Chinese coins had square holes so they could be strung together on cord. 1,000 coins made a string, heavy, clunky, and perfect for bribery. Wealth made noise. 121. In elite households, meals were announced with small gongs or bamboo clappers, and each dish was carried in on lacquered trays by silent servants. The more courses, the higher the status. Some dinners lasted 4 hours, some guests never touched a thing. 122. The examination cells for the imperial exams were small brick rooms, barely wide enough to sit cross-legged. Candidates were locked inside for 3 days with a writing board, food, and chamber pot. Answers were copied by clerks to prevent handwriting bias. Meritocracy had a smell. 123. Before matches, wrestlers in ancient China bowed 3 times, slapped their thighs, and stomped to honor the ground beneath them. The match itself was silent. The ceremony was louder than the fight. 124. Some tombs contained stone pillows carved with inscriptions, blessings for restful sleep in the afterlife or protection from restless spirits. They weren't soft, but the writing was thoughtful. 125. The emperor's robes included secret messages woven into the seams, symbols of power, fate, or warnings only visible up close. Sometimes only the wearer knew they were there, which made them louder. 126. When lightning struck a home, it was seen as a sign of cosmic imbalance. Households repainted doors, buried offerings, and recited repentance prayers. The damage was secondary. The symbolism came first. 127. The Chinese word for bat sounds like the word for fortune. Because of this, bat patterns appeared on porcelain robes and roof tiles, not because people liked bats, just their sound. 128. Some scrolls were copied not for content but for handwriting practice. Page after page, line after line, the same characters repeated until the ink ran out or the student passed out. Mastery was muscle memory and stubbornness. 129. Court musicians trained for decades and performed with such restraint that a perfect performance might mean no applause at all. Harmony was expected, and silence was praise. 130. In winter, charcoal braziers warmed rooms. But without chimneys, the smoke built up. Some homes traded cold for headaches. Comfort had terms. 131. Zodiac compatibility was taken seriously. Matchmakers consulted birth charts to determine if 2 people were destined for joy, misfortune, or awkward silence. Sometimes the stars approved, sometimes they shrugged. 132. A tax collector's seal was his identity. If it was stolen or lost, he could be imprisoned, or worse. The seal had to be returned in person under watch by deadline. 133. Ancient marketplaces sold live fish, fresh tofu, bundles of herbs and duck eggs packed in clay. Vendors called out prices. Bargaining was expected. Silence was considered suspicious. 134. Ink sticks were made by grinding soot from pine wood and mixing it with glue. They were shaped into bricks and stamped with gold. Each one took weeks to dry and seconds to wear down. 135. In Taoist practice, talismans were burned and the ashes mixed with water. The drinker swallowed the charm. Protection, they believed, was absorbed through digestion. Sometimes the stomach was safer than the temple. 136. The character for quiet in Chinese combines symbols for roof and stop. It implies stillness under shelter, or the moment just before someone speaks. Either way, it rarely lasts. 137. Bronze mirrors, reflected with a soft, cloudy surface. You could see your face, but only just, which made them ideal for focusing on flaws without noticing yourself. 138. A feng shui master would read the shape of a mountain or curve of a river to determine where a house should be built. A poor reading could mean years of bad luck, or just a flooded kitchen. 139. The imperial garden wasn't meant for picking, it was for walking in silence. Rocks were chosen for their texture, trees for their age, water for its reflection. 140. There were ghosts in Chinese folklore who were always hungry, not for food, but for forgotten names, unpaid debts, and unfinished sentences. They lingered until remembered. 141. During the Han Dynasty, the imperial post system spanned over 9,000 kilometers. Messages were relayed between stations using fresh horses and uniformed riders. Only official mail was allowed. Everyone else waited for rumors. 142. Bronze ritual vessels from the Shang Dynasty were cast using clay molds. Each mold was destroyed to remove the finished piece. No two vessels were identical. Perfection wasn't repeated. It was broken to be kept at 143. Ancient Chinese judges often heard cases in open courtyards. Witnesses knelt on the ground, arguments were shouted, and decisions were sometimes rendered on the spot. The law was public and personal. 144. The Chinese decimal system used counting rods arranged in vertical and horizontal lines. They could represent any number up to 10,000 without ink. Mathematicians worked in silence and left no paper trail. 145 them. Palace doors were fitted with 9 rows of 9 nails. 81 was considered the perfect square, the balance of heaven and earth. If you noticed the number, you were paying attention. 146. Imperial tombs were often constructed decades before the emperor died. Some began planning their graves before their coronation. It was both preparation and reminder. 147. Before compasses were common, fortune-tellers used the Big Dipper to orient their rituals. The constellation's position was believed to affect human behavior. Direction was divined, not guessed. 148. Silkworms are blind. They eat, spin, and die without seeing the thread they create. Ancient farmers raised them indoors in complete silence so as not to disturb their work. 149. Public punishments were sometimes staged outside city gates. Stocks, floggings, and beheadings took place in view of travellers. The goal wasn't justice, it was memory. 150. The Chinese invented suspension bridges, wheelbarrows, deep drilling, and paper long before the West, but never called them inventions. They were described simply as methods that work. 151. Paintings on silk were rolled for storage. Every unrolling caused micro-tears. Scholars debated how often a scroll should be viewed. Sometimes art was preserved by hiding it. 152. Ancient Chinese coins were round with square holes. The circle symbolized heaven. The square represented earth. Your wealth sat between the two. 153. Incense was burned not just for ritual, but to measure time. Special coils or sticks were marked to burn at known intervals. Time passed slowly and smelled like sandalwood. 154. Some emperors forbade their portraits from being painted until after death. They didn't want artists guessing at immortality. Memory was allowed. Guesswork wasn't. 155. Taoist monks believed the body contained miniature worlds. Organs corresponded to celestial realms. Illness meant disorder in the universe inside you. Healing took maps and metaphors. 156. City walls were sometimes built with sticky rice mortar, a mixture of lime and glutinous rice paste. It resisted water, weather, and siege, a recipe strong enough to hold back time. 157. Ancient scholars sometimes refused government appointments on principle. They lived in poverty, wrote essays on ethics, and quietly waited to be forgotten. It wasn't protest, it was policy. 158. Some farmers trained ducks to patrol rice fields. They ate insects and weeds, left the plants untouched, and worked for free. The system was efficient and slightly noisy. 159. Bamboo flutes used in rituals were tuned by carving and recarving. No reed, no mouthpiece, just breath and memory. Every note passed through patience. 160. Old temples often leaned slightly, not from damage, but because they were designed to. A flaw was added on purpose so the gods wouldn't get jealous. 161. Imperial astrologers submitted daily reports to the throne. They recorded sunrise colors, star alignments, and cloud shapes, then interpreted whether crops would grow, armies would win, or someone should be executed. The sky was busy, but never held accountable. 162. Stone tablets lined the roads leading to imperial tombs. Each tablet was blank until a new emperor carved a eulogy for the previous one. Some were never inscribed, because no one found the words, or the will. 163. Cranes symbolized longevity, so much so that portraits often showed scholars standing beside one, as if the bird itself extended their resume. Elegance doubled as insurance. 164. At its peak, Chang'an, the capital of the Tang dynasty, was one of the largest cities in the world. Its grid layout, night curfews and watchtowers made it feel orderly, unless you lived near the market where everything ran late and loud. 165. The fortune teller's most important tool wasn't the tortoise shell or the bamboo sticks, it was silence. Long pauses meant accuracy, short answers meant confidence, both made people nervous. 166. Many scholars kept pet crickets, not for luck, for their song. The sound was considered soothing, especially when everything else went quiet. 167. Some grave robbers used long, hooked poles to pull items from tombs without entering. It wasn't foolproof, but it made it easier to run. 168. Ancient bronze mirrors were often engraved on the back with protective charms or poems. The front reflected the face. The back reflected intention. 169. Imperial palaces had stone drains carved beneath them, some shaped like dragons or fish to channel bad energy away. Plumbing was spiritual and specific. 170. Officials wore badges made of jade, ivory, or bronze, depending on their rank. Losing one meant losing your job or your head, sometimes both. 171. Ancient bathhouses served tea, told fortunes, offered massages, and sometimes ended in lawsuits. Cleanliness came with conversation and complaints. 172. During solar eclipses, officials beat drums to scare away the celestial dragon they believed was eating the sun. It usually worked. Eventually. 173. In the earliest Chinese dictionaries, words were organized by number of brushstrokes. Not sound, not meaning, just effort. 174. Firefighters existed in ancient cities, but they were usually hired by merchants, not the state. Putting out fires was a business expense, not a civic duty. 175. The character for music also meant joy, but only when it wasn't followed by the symbol for mourning. Language listened sometimes. 176. Some temples banned mirrors, believing that reflections could trap spirits. Instead, surfaces were left matte, so no one could accidentally meet themselves twice. 177. When constructing large buildings, architects consulted geomancers, not just engineers. You could build a perfect structure and still invite ruin if the front door faced the wrong wind. 178. Imperial processions had rules for every footstep. Drummers walked on the left, horsemen walked behind, no one spoke, except the bells. 179. The Ministry of Justice once issued a 300-page code. It included laws for theft, murder, tax evasion, and disrespectful glances. The law covered everything, even what couldn't be proven. 180. Poems were inscribed on cliffsides, meant to be read while climbing a mountain. The higher the verse, the fewer people reached it, which made it more important and less discussed. 181. Some ancient coins were melted down and cast into miniature Buddha statues. They weren't for worship. They were hidden in walls for luck, just in case the next dynasty lasted longer than the currency. 182. The word for library in ancient Chinese literally meant building of hidden books, because scrolls were stored in dark rooms behind screens and the catalogue existed only in memory. It was less about reading, more about remembering where not to look. 183. When crops failed, some villages offered rice to river gods, placing bowls on floating lanterns and pushing them into the current. If the bowls came back empty, they assumed the gods had accepted. If they sank, no one talked about it. 184. A judge could overturn a verdict if the accused wrote a well-reasoned poem explaining their innocence. The rhymes had to be tight, and the tone very humble. 185. The Imperial Music Bureau didn't just train musicians, it also recorded bird songs, marketplace chants, and funeral dirges from distant provinces. Sound was history, even when no one asked it to be. 186. Monks sometimes grew out their fingernails as a sign of detachment from earthly labor. The longer the nail, the less they were expected to do. Enlightenment had a schedule, and no chores. 187. Ancient recipes included things like donkey hide gelatin, pine nut paste, and roasted wasp larvae. They weren't daily meals, they were medicine, but no one could taste the difference. 188. Oxen used for ploughing were sometimes given names, recorded in ledgers alongside the land they worked. They couldn't read them, but the government could. 189. Royal decrees were copied onto silk before being engraved in stone. Ink faded, but stone was forever, at least until the next emperor changed his mind. 190. Thunder was considered a sign of heaven's disapproval. If it struck during a legal trial, the verdict was postponed, just in case the clouds had more to say. 191. Some emperors were buried with tiny clay toilets in their tombs, not for use, but for completeness. Eternity was expected to be inconvenient. 192. A single jar of fermented tofu could last over a decade. It grew stronger, saltier, and more suspicious with age. Some called it flavorful, others called it a dare. 193. Some ancient pillows were made of porcelain. They stayed cool in summer and reminded you not to sleep too long. Comfort was optional. Posture wasn't. 194. Royal astrologers used polished brass mirrors to reflect the moon into bowls of water where they read signs in the ripples. Interpretation took patience and a very steady hand. The 195, as clay roof tiles from ancient homes were stamped with family names or short messages like safe house or peaceful wind, just in case the roof ever forgot its job. 196. The word for grave shares characters with earth and stop, a place to rest, and a suggestion. 197. Some emperors banned the colour yellow from all clothing except their own. It wasn't a trend, it was a warning. 198. Mountain hermits recorded the weather with charcoal marks on cliff faces. No one read them except the next hermit. 199. Some towns banned mirrors at night, believing reflections could confuse the soul during dreams. Sleep was important, so was not waking up wrong. 200. Ancient China never tried to be understood. It just kept building, recording, planting, burying, and waiting. Most of what's left is broken, mistranslated, or slightly exaggerated, which is to say exactly how memory works. There you have it. 200 boring facts about ancient China. Each one quiet, a little strange, and entirely real if you're still awake. Well, we tried. If this helped you drift, please like and subscribe and let us know in the comments what time it is and where you're listening from. We love seeing our night owls. Now close your eyes, let everything fade, and let history go quiet again. Sleep well.